I don't think I have any announcements except for yay, we're back. You have any, Sam?
I do not. No. Do
Great.
we have anyone in lined up for a future talk at this point with dates or not?
Not so far.
Okay,
I keep reaching out, but people are busy, so I think it's you and I for right now.
got it.
People future.
Do we have also maybe what's coming? I haven't talked to you, I don't think about this, but what
No.
what are we going to do after Trachandrena? We'll finish Trachandrena today.
Let's chat about that after.
All right, and
Unless
people,
if people please put in the chat, or email me if you have requests.
great.
I think working through the subgenera is really helpful because that's how we went through with Mike in the beginning, and he gave us some
Mhm.
good notes on subgenera as we went. So I think that's a nice way to organize it.
Okay,
But if the group has other ideas, this is a resource for you. So let us know what you need.
got it.
And it's Sam's turn now.
All right. So we have been working through Trachandrena. We have been using a combination of the Discover Life uh, pictures. And Claire, you might pull up some pictures too, because sometimes they're going to be better. And the microscope, I have a collection of Trachandrena females here. And just as a side note, I have yet to really tackle the male Trachandrena, which I found confusing in terms of their ID string, much more than the females. But that's in the future, particularly because we're getting some molecular action. And today, our new molecular biologist, volunteer though, came in and is setting up his shop. So we'll get back to people on that in terms of what they want us to track down in terms of identification, related morphology issues on species, and we can take volunteer um, donations of specimens that are questionable, and we'll see what we can come up with. Okay, so I'm going to share. We'll start with Andrena quintilis. We're going to use the Trachandrena Excel file. Let me find where we are here. Hit share. Talk my way through this screen. And we should be good. Can you see, Claire? Do you see the?
No, it's great.
All right. So quintilis. So the thing about quintilis is that I almost never, I'm not even sure if we have any in our database, see this species. It's a Midwestern in terms of the distribution. So it's kissing up to the eastern United States, and therefore our guides just a little bit. And we'll go through the identification. I have material here from another collection, so we can see examples of this, but I have less of a internal portrait, so to speak, of what's going on here. So when using the spreadsheet, sorry for zooming around here, what we're looking for in terms of an initial investigation of a specimen that we have a feeling might be a certain species is to go to that species, in this case, quintilis, and then you uh, pace over tab over until you find sections that are in yellow, highlighted in yellow, and those in combination together should be a unique set of, if present, characters, states of characters that would yield an identification for that species. So in this case, we see when we're looking at the internal propodial triangle. So what's going on inside that propodial triangle? You can see in most of the other species, you basically have just a long set of rectangles in terms of the cell structure in between the striations or the carini that are raised up, usually very prominently within. But there are a few, and this turns out to be a useful character for separating them out, which are, in this case, not rectangular. So quintilis and rehni, the next species, will be another one. So quintilis has that, and then we're going to pace through here, has big distinct bands of bright white hair on T2 and 3. And what else do we got that note? Mostly Midwestern. And then under special features, the pitting all across T2 is uniformly dense. So a lot of times pits almost touching. So many times we see that there might be dense pitting in T2 on the base, but not along the rim, not near where the repressed area borders the base area. So as you'll recall, there's a recessed area to T2 and to T3 too, but we rarely look at that. That is in the Trachandrena group, much further towards the base, sometimes almost 90% of the way to the base in comparison to other species of Andrena. So let's see what we can see. Let's first go take a look, and in some of the remaining specimens, we'll take a look and see what the alternative is, the rectangular one. So this is the not rectangular view. Let's jump over to the camera, and let me make it, I think that's the right combination. Make it full bore here. Take it down, and there's my finger. And here we go. I'm going to move the specimen so that its radial triangle area is maximized. And we'll zoom in here. Leave it at that for now. And most of you are propodial triangle experts now. So you can see that the propodial triangle is using from this suture line where we have the scutellum, the metanotum, propodium. Propodial triangle is this usually well demarcated triangular area that is dorsal or on top of the specimen. And then you have lateral faces and rear faces to the propodium. And this triangle usually is crisply differentiated from the lateral sides. So you can really see the triangular shape, and the tip of the triangle bends over onto this rear face, sometimes sharply, sometimes gradually. And it's a little bit hard to see anything in clear for just a dirty old specimen, probably 100 years old. I'll zoom in a bit here. And then within, so that's something to note, because many of the Trachandrena have a very clear, here's the boundary roughly here, that this surface area is quite different from this surface area. And here, it's not so much. In fact, just seeing the border between the two is really tough. Additionally, you'll see that these aren't long triangles. These are more squarish or erratic in their shape. We can look at another specimen too. So that's one, but would you take that home to your mother and ask if that's definitive and then base your entire life savings on it? Probably not. So here is T2. So this is where the other two characters that help define the species. First of all, we'll see here on T2. You know what? I'm going to bend this specimen over a little bit more. So T2 is more horizontal to our view. And that's pretty good right there. Almost always in bee specimens, their abdomen droops over under normal pinning conditions. And that's useful because then you can see features on the front of the abdomen and the rear face of the propodium. If you had moved this abdomen up, which sometimes people do simply by, after pinning, is holding the specimen or pinning the specimen upside down in clay, or sometimes you can do that in soft foam of a collection box, and then it will dry like that. Again, you run into this issue. A lot of times there's some really nice features that would then be hidden because the abdomen is tucked too far up towards the thorax. So here are the two features that were also mentioned that in conjunction with the non-rectangular look to the propodial triangle, you have very strong white boundaries, border hair, trim. It's not complete, so it's not going all the way across. And then you have a very, very dense pitting. So basically, those are touching or nearly touching throughout. So here we see about 50% of the way up, maybe, yeah, about 50%, I'd say, is this line, which is representing the difference, the border, the boundary between the repressed area and the elevated area. And by those two terms, we're talking very subtle differences. These exist in basically all bee species, but usually it's following the rim. So this is pushed way back, another nice character of Trachandrena. So those are the main characters. There are, if you go back here, one thing to do in a lot of cases, if you're still a little bit unsure, is to go through some of these other characteristics. So fat to thin ratio is 2, which isn't very much, right? In comparison, you have 3 to 4, 3s and 3.5s and 3s sprinkled quite a bit around here, which means that simply that the thin area is not as thin and the fat area is not as fat in comparison to other species. We'll take a quick look at that. And you can see, sometimes when you're on unsure territory, looking at the other characters, even if they're not highlighted, is useful in feeling better about your identification or feeling better about an alternative identification. So let's just jump back here to the microscope and we will take a quick look at the face and see if it's possible. Foveas are sometimes difficult to see, and that seems to be, well, we can make an outline up here, so not as broad. So there's the, that's a central ocelli, there's a lateral, terrible specimen. There's the facial fovea, not, eating up tons of real estate. And down here, hidden by the hairs, as usual, would be the thin area of that facial fovea. And we can see it kind of peeking out here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we've seen these several times, but there's an implication in just that small window that it's relatively broad, not a slot, as it is in some other cases. So we'll remove that specimen.
Oh, before you do.
Yeah.
So you kind of just address this, like there's on the Discover Life species page, there's a little summary, as there sometimes they are.
Yep.
That it points out the it has there's sometimes stuff that you probably won't talk about too much, but sexy, where was it? Short turtle epicaries, you said that. High vertex, and in your cheat sheet, you do have a comment that says the thick hairs. In this summary, it's called the scale-like thoracic hairs. So you want to show us those?
So it says scale-like hairs?
Scale-like hairs on the thorax. Okay. Yeah.
On the thorax. Okay. Do I mention that on here?
You do.
On the special features? In Discover Life. Okay.
Well, you say here on your under special features, note the thickened hairs on scutellum.
Yeah. So okay. This is probably the problem with having these very handy files is that they get replicated, and my replication probably does not, well, certainly doesn't have it. Like I don't see it here. Okay, so we're looking on the thorax. Well, first of all, let's go back here. Let's take a quick look again, just to get a visual. So you just see in the propodial triangle area, which is this boundary here, you can see the difference. But this internal area is not really, it's sort of a little bit of a crazy mix of elevated striations, making cells, but a lot of times they're curved or have involucres into them. So it's not a set of rectangles. Here, I think, is what is being mentioned already. We're just looking at it from a matter of convenience, that these hairs are relatively thick compared to the normal hairs. And we don't quite have the power here, but I believe you can see in here indications that this thickness comes from minute, perhaps scale-like sometimes things like this are called, smaller hairs that are coming off the main stem. So instead of having a nice thin line, you certainly have that rachis, that thin line there, and then it feathers out a little bit. And that presents a more of a densely thicker specimen. So another Andrena that has this, it's always very useful, is Andrena allegheniensis. And there's a couple others too, I believe. So yeah, so this, now you're looking straight down on a lot of these, but you can see that here's your basic hair that is either got only a few side branches or hardly any. And then here are these thicker hairs that we're seeing to the side. All right, good. I'm glad you brought that up there because that was not in my obviously older version. And we're looking straight down now, go all the way up. And you can see in some of these, so we're looking straight down these hairs over here, and you can see these little side hairs, or at least indications that they might be there at the resolution of this microscope. And then it's a strong contrast between these up here, these nice thin normal hairs, which do have tiny little side hairs, but nowhere near this density, making it not so fat a thing. And then there was a comment that the vertex is fairly tall, so
Yes,
that
but I think you have that covered in here by your
the marking and the thing of the
yeah, the vertex
the marking on the Excel spreadsheet. Yeah, so we can see usually things are measured here in diameters of ocelli. So you've got one ocelli, so you can fit at least one, almost two, but certainly 1.5, certainly much greater than one. And I believe, not looking at the spreadsheet myself right now, that many other Trachandrena, these ocelli are closer to the rim. So there you go. If you're in the Far East, though, meaning over here near the coast, I never see this, but I don't know the distribution completely, but if you're in the Midwest, this is something that will pop up. Okay, now we get to the very interesting case of Andrena rehni. And yeah,
similar to Allegensis,
the hair.
Yes. Is there anything else, like, should we be concerned about that they're best friends?
Well, I'm not going to get into their interpersonal relationships, but I believe they're in completely separate subgenera.
Oh yeah, it's a scrap top. Never mind. Yep.
But if you look at, so Andrena allegheniensis and its cousin Atlantica have one of the features that Trachandrena does have, which is they have a carina that clips the tip of the propodial triangle right at the edge where the propodium bends over to the vertical face. And they have that too. They have a very, very sparse propodial triangle. So who knows, in the next of whatever number of revisions we're up against, that they may get lumped into the Trachandrena or vice versa. So now the situation that we're going to look at is with Andrena rehni. And looking at this particular specimen here. And it's a longer story, which we don't have time right now, but if you have chestnut or chinkapin, which is in the same genus in your region, you should look for the species. A lot of times in a fresher specimen, you can see potentially a little bit of glint to this. It's got fairly obvious blue glintings to the surface coloration of the integument. You can see that maybe a little bit if you're ambitious in your look, but on old specimens, integument color often fades away. Okay, so it turns out that it's a chestnut specialist, which is kind of cool. And we had for quite a while thought it was one of these missing species that had been collected 100 years ago and then were not around. And the answer was, yes, it's still around, probably a lot less, but because it's a chestnut specialist, you have to look on chestnut or chinkapin, and almost nobody does. And until recently, a lot of people did not even think that of chestnut as I'm looking for my Trachandrena thing here. Oh, here's a different version. And I'm going to go back. As they didn't think of chestnut as even being insect pollinated. Turns out it's complicated. It is both likely to be wind and insect pollinated, and it has its own little specialist, which is this one. So let's look at the yellow cells here first. So first of all, we see that the second antennal segment is quite long. So a lot of the others are basically squares or even less. And that alone is going to take you to the bank if you're very good at your antennal segment measurements in terms of separating it from the other species. It also, vertex height is pretty tall, 1.5 to 2. So similar to what we were seeing, which is almost exactly what we have for quintilis. We also have a same thing, tall carina, large cells, not rectangular. We don't have that hair, as we'll see, at least not as prominent that we were looking at. And that, oh, here we go. Pitting on T1 is very widely spaced. So again, very different from quintilis, 0.5 to 1. We have 2 to 4. So 2 to 4 pit diameters apart on averaging on the first segment. And here's some notes. Shallow facial fovea compared to others. Labrum maybe broader than others. So it sounds like more like notes to myself. Okay, let's take a look at our specimen. And we'll start with the face here. So what we're looking for is a fairly, well, we can look for that shallow facial fovea. Looking for the high vertex. And we're going to look at F2 on the antennae. So let's do the antennae first because that's the most distinctive thing. Was it F2 or F1? Let me go back and check. F2? Yeah, so 1.25 to 1.4. So longer. All right, so if we look here, again, we get into that situation that maybe in comparison. So here's F1. We're at high magnification 2, and this is F2. I'm going to bump the light up here. Get a little more of an idea about this feature. And where the heck? There we go. So let's see. We go down to here. Okay, that's pretty good. We go back. It's moved out of focus again. So here's the lower boundary. Here's the upper boundary. This would be the length, and this would be, you'd probably pick, I believe there's measurement guidelines, the maximum width. So it is a bit longer, but not outrageously off of a one-to-one configuration in that view. But let's take a look at the other segment, other one, which might offer. This is why holding it in your hand is helpful because you can angle things back and forth, and none of these things are exact. Okay, pedicel, F1, F2. Here, the lengthiness, that is, this axis is greater than that axis, is a lot clearer. So there's a positive feature. I'm going to go back down in my light level. Let's go to 100. There's a note that these facial fovea are shallower, may not show up well here, but I think there's you can get a sense. They're not crisp and they're not deeply, partially because they're not deeply indented compared to the others. Now the vertex, I'm going to change the angle a bit so that we're, as in all these kinds of measurements, if you are not looking with the thing to be measured at exactly right angles in terms of the plane of the specimen, then you're going to shorten it. So here we can see there's the ocelli, that's our measuring tool. So you can imagine 1 plus, quite a bit plus, nearing 2 there in terms of the vertex height. And if we go back, because I need to go back and refresh on that, 1.5 to 2. So that fits definitely in there in the vertex height. Now, what was the other feature? We looked at those too. The well, we haven't yet, but we'll look at that. Non-rectangular cells and hitting on T1 is sparser than most. Okay, so let's go back down. Change here. Look at T1. Get a visual on that. It should be good enough. So we're not looking at T2 now. We're looking at T1, the first tergite, so named. And we should see pitting as we always do. And I think that's probably sufficient. I could boost the light up, but that takes just a little bit of time here to see that that is not like what we saw, for example, in quintilis and some of the other specimens, and including species we're going to about ready to show rugosa. You can see that these pits are well spaced. Okay. So I think it's just a little bit dark. Here, I'll just bend the specimen. That's probably the easiest thing to do here. And that probably brings us into a better view of the propodium. Yeah, some glare, but I think on a closer inspection. So depending on your frame of reference, you could say, well, those are pretty close. But compared to many of the other trachandrenas in particular, which the pits, as we'll see again today, are basically right on top of each other. There's quite a bit of spacing, particularly if you use a pit diameter as a measurement. Yeah, there we go. So you can see very clearly that. Now we have the propodium right next to us. So we want to look at the triangle area here, and we should see what are not clear rectangles. So this is part of the, you need a lot of experience over many, many specimens to say, well, I don't know, is that or isn't it? But it's, you can't really make rectangles out of that. So if you have looked at many of these, that would be a good character. If you've not looked at many, you might have questions in your mind. But again, we have this area here is a little bit denser in terms of its hill and surface structure. There's the edge, which you can barely make out of the propodial triangle, but not a very clearly differentiated blocky rectangular space. So that is the chestnut bee. Now we will go to rugosa, which has tends to be a relatively common species. I associate it very strongly with woodlands. And a pretty clean specimen. Very strongly bowed, just in terms of thinking about it, very strongly bowed. I want to use a different specimen. Very strongly bowed facial fovea that leaves a large gap. There we go. Between the side of the eye and the furthest distance of that skinny part of that facial fovea. Let's go to our friend, the Excel spreadsheet. So here's rugosa. This one, unlike the other two, are relatively common. And so we look for our yellow areas here. So we see scutum pitting 0.5 to overlapping. So it should be incredibly dense. In fact, rugosa probably is in reference to ruggedness or the extra amount of surface sculpturing this species would have. And I would tend to agree with that. Okay, then we can look at the long rectangles rather than the not rectangular thing on the propodial triangle. Keeping going, you see that T2, the depressed area, pretty wide, 0.7 to nearly 0.9. And do we have anything else? Do you have something there? Did I erase it on mine, Claire? The special features? All right.
Also from our, handy note within the species page. I think you just said this with your word, but
Okay.
vernal, the associated flores. Female is noted for lower portion of the facial fovea being separated from the eye by 2 times as and it's often shiny in this area. Fovea above antenna with small rugae, sputum impressed apically, usually dull, coarse pits, T2 impressed 2/3 of the rugae.
Delicious.
So,
Okay, so let's take a look at this facial fovea area since we were just talking about it. And I have the specimen ready to go. So in contrast to what we were looking at last time, you can see there, we'll just leave it here for a second. So here you can see this facial fovea. It's pretty wide, first of all, to begin with, and it's very, I think it just shows up as very crisply defined. And if you were looking at it at a scans, you'd see that these edges are very nicely defined, and this is relatively deep. And then it's, so here, if we look on this specimen, let's zoom in a little bit more. We have the hair problem of the lower part, but I think we get the hint because it's so strongly defined. So here is the edge of the facial fovea. This is the whiter part up here, as per usual. And instead of just kind of wandering along and border to the eye, what you see is that it runs out, it bows out here. So it's actually leaving the wide area fairly far inland. And it's running in a very skinny way and runs back like this. So that means that there is a shiny, in this case, area of integument between the eye and the maximum width of this distance to the facial fovea. That's fairly wide. So if we look at a measuring tool, we'd say it's about twice, I think, or maybe more than twice of the difficult to see because of the hairs width of this narrow part from the eye. This is quite extreme compared to other species. So that's another good general character for this species. And this is one that Easterners will see more commonly and probably is a denizen of canopies that we don't tend to study very much. But we catch it pretty regularly down in the forest floor in the spring in nice deciduous woods. Okay, now we're going to go for this notion of deep pits touching one another or nearly touching one another on the back. And There we go. So you can see that many of these pits, particularly as you get, and this happens in general, as you get to the anterior edge, pitting in general increases and can pile up. Algochlorella aurata is a good example of that. So even back here, though, you can see these pits are almost always touching another pit somewhere in their diameter. There are still little gaps there, but as you move towards the anterior edge, so this is the anterior edge, you see that it looks like they almost all are touching, in fact, are just becoming a general surface busyness rather than even pits. So that's again, one of the primary definitions of rugosa is to look at that. And then if we go to T2, we're going to look to see if it has a very wide depressed area. So that distance from the rim to where it elevates, again, very unusually long, particularly if you dial back to looking at all the Andrena species. Again, just have a little depressed rim down here. Here it is. It's usually you have this is very typical where the sides, the depressed rim of the sides, sort of bends back towards the rim, the depressed area boundary, I should say, bends back to the rim. But here, right in the center line, you can see 75 to 80%, 90% not a problem in terms of that. That's where it is about there. Huge distance. So that's our friend rugosa. Oh, let's look at the propodial triangle, which should be in a rectangular mode as opposed to what we were seeing. Is not a strong character of this species, but for the other two, it is in contrast. So here we go. Now we have a couple things. One, you can really see here's the defining raised carina that separates the triangle from the back surface that's vertical. So this is the ventral face. Here are the very nicely demarcated boundaries between the triangle and the lateral face. And here are these very rectangular created spaces, cells, if you will, by the striations. Typical of many, but not all. All right. Onward. We can only leave after they're all done. All right, sigmundi. This is sort of my own personal nightmare species. And the reason for that is the primary. So let's go, first of all, we'll go to the spreadsheet to be easier to explain. So here's sigmundi. I can't remember. It's possibly that it's been associated in the past with willows. And you can see it's very close to Forbesii and Marie, both of which have lots of pits on T1. And the primary way, as we go, first of all, scutum pitting 0. So it's basically they're on top of each other. So that's should be a pretty good character. But you can see here Forbesii is also in that category. And Marie, not so much. Little gaps in between there, but certainly we can't eliminate it just on the fact that the pits are all jumbled next to each other. Present and clear, again, Forbesii, very similar to that. And so we have, usually when it's present and clear, it means that the outside and the inside of the triangle are very different and so are defined nice and crisply. And we keep going. Hind tibia may be more cuneate than most, but this is the one, the character in, I think it might be both Mitchell and in whatever LaBerge version of his revision is there. And it's a little difficult to see here because of Excel. But basically, you're looking for the inner hind tibial spur. So when we're looking at tibial spurs, in bees, it's almost always the inner one that is doing something interesting. The outer one seems to be largely just a nice little smooth curved thing. And then the inside, if something interesting is going to happen, it's going to happen on the inside. Anyway, that's the case here. The inner hind tibial spur with bend or kink in it that makes it appear to be slightly S-shaped. Hard to see. There's the Willow's comment. So the tricky thing is it is hard to see. So let's see if we can see it. Let me just look in the microscope, see if I can even get a hint of it on this specimen. Otherwise, it might not be worth it. So if the legs are tucked close to the body, then you have a difficult time seeing these things. I'll also point out that we are looking at the paratype, or one of the paratypes. So a paratype is additional specimens that when the type was created are also the same species that can be used for reference and material. And I can see one of these inner tibial spurs quite well. And I don't see that bend or kink that much. I have to maybe spend more time looking at these paratypes. Okay, so when we were looking at the propodial triangle, here we are back in that same world of rectangular. So here are these large defined striations running down, very sharply demarcated situation. And on T1, there are a lot of pits. So that's pretty good density. And then on the scutum, they basically, let me get a better angle. They basically should be touching one another, all of them. See if that is true. Jump up here. Well, the fact that we're having a hard time seeing this probably means that they are touching one another and making it so we don't have the shiny interstitial spaces. There's a little bit there, but that's probably the parapsital line. So I'm going to, this seems like something to see. We'll change the lighting. So go there and bump it up 300. Nice. Make this big. All right. So we can see the pits better here. You have a darn big pin right in the middle of everything. So I'm going to try and get things to the side. Get things in focus. It's a little bit hard to see. I do see some gaps though. But mostly, I think any particular pit has another pit that it is touching. It's not like we have isolated pits that I can see, but I'm not thoroughly convinced that maybe it's always zero. Let's take a look down here. But it's pretty darn close. So we can look throughout these areas and we see most of the time it's touching. So whether it's 100% or not, it's a little hard to tell. Now, the very tricky thing, which I'm going to have to turn the specimen upside down. We'll keep the light on high because we'll have to be at probably at a high magnification. You see a leg that is covered in pollen here. And we have two spurs. So it's a little confusing, but here is this almost always normal outer spur. So this is the outside face, which makes sense because there's all the pollen in there. Who knows what that is? 100-year-old pollen. Then behind there is the theoretically kinked, and it is not, in this case, this is what I don't like about it. It's not as clear. Like there are some, like Andrena macra and Andrena cretigi have very distinct hind inner tibial spurs that you can go to the bank on. This one has just always been like, okay, you know, it's wide here and then tapers off. This line not tapering equally. And it looks like there is a very slight kink in there. And if we look from the other direction, it's also curved. But I'm just telling you that it is not an easy lift to see that thing. I'm going to go back and drop the lighting down. So, sigmundi, and now we have two remaining. Spiraeana, which is very similar to, I'm going to pick out a specimen here that's cleaner. Well, no, to Heraclei. So the key will be looking at the ocelli area between the ocelli and the antennae. Let's take a look here. Spiraeana. Okay, yellow areas, yellow highlighted spots. Move this out of the way. So we have this situation that occurs also in Heraclei. And so instead of having, we'll try to look at this on virginiana when we get it. Instead of having that area between the ocelli and the antenna being filled with lots of pits and lots of striations of different kinds and busyness, it's relatively calm, it's relatively smooth with relatively small, well-spaced pits in it. So that's quite different. And it's really just, is it this one or this one? And every once in a while you try and second guess yourself, as we'll take a look at that area and go like, okay, well, maybe there's a little bit of striations there. So maybe it's not what I think. That's the value of having collections of things. So, and collecting a lot of specimens, because then you can look at variation. So the fovea, so the next yellow one, the distance to the rim of the eye is pretty wide. So 0.7 to 1.2. Another feature. But you can see, we go back up here. Oh my gosh, so does Heraclei have that same thing. So there's some redundancy in these characters, fortunately. Depressed area 0.8 to 0.9. Heraclei not that much different. You see 0.75 instead. Difference between 0.75 and 0.8, pretty small. And it has distinct bands, white hairs on the sides of T2, which Heraclei is not apparently given to, or there's some question marks. But the pitting, this is the one that really separates it out from Heraclei. So Heraclei has very dense pitting on T1, whereas on Spiraeana, it's quite widely spaced. Now, that's widely spaced for Trachandrena. So on average, we're seeing three ocelli differences, three ocelli diameters apart. And sometimes there's a note here, sometimes hints of orangish on the integument, which means you have to watch out for hippodes, which is very orange. Okay, so let's take a look at these things. We'll start on the head. And I think I have something queued up. Get this large. There's a finger. Usually a very dirty finger. All right, so we want to look for this smooth area between the ocelli. This is a pretty good shot. The scheme of Andrena specimens. So this area between the ocelli and the um, and the antennae, this area right through here, very, there's some scattered, relatively small pits. It's reflecting light, and that you can see it in a couple different places on the head and as well. There's not a lot of surface sculpturing. There's a tiny bit though. That's where you start second guessing things. If we look, as was mentioned, at the edge of the eye to the bend in the facial fovea, here's a facial fovea, right? So it pulls away. So this distance here is much greater than one width of the facial fovea narrow part here. So in other words, it's pulled quite a distance away. It's not running close like some do. All right, when we now, the very most definitive thing will be what's going on T1. Should be very sparsely pitted compared to Heraclei, where everything is quite densely and very densely really pitted. This should have well-spaced pits. So much of the like individual life histories of these bee species is still pretty murky. Like maybe it's on willow, but you look at the records, it's like, yeah, you caught it on willow, but lots of things get caught on willow. All right, so again, similar to one of the other species that we were looking at, maybe rehni, you could say, okay, well, that's pretty dense there. I'm going to change the lighting. No, that's good. So you can say pretty dense. Well, in comparison to something that has just pits here and there, true. But when we look at the spacing, almost basically none of them are touching one another. And if we use these small pit diameters, you can see that, yep, at least three, often greater than three pit diameters apart from their nearest neighbor. So that gives you a pretty distinctive hit on the species. You can see our friend, the rectangle, and these rectangular cellular-like structures here on the propodial triangle. Okay, now we have one left for Eastern ones. And who knows if someone actually bothered to do a bunch of molecular work, what they would find hiding amidst these Trachandrenas. Virginiana, which I think of when I think of Virginiana, I think of like your generic Trachandrena. Nothing, no one thing really speaks. So you have a moderate 2 to 3 fat to narrow, not like on the extreme end, but pretty narrow, pretty fat. And we have the long rectangular carini, as most do. You have no border of the propodial triangle. So in other words, these areas when we're looking at the propodial triangle, we can't really see a clear raised line, absent. So that's useful. And then when we're looking at the relative sculptural differences between the inside of the triangle and the outside, it's a very, very slightly more coarse than the outside. The inside is. So also useful. The hind tibia is brown. That differentiates it here from the podes. And this fact that you have a lot of these yellow areas means that it's just a process of elimination that gets you almost to Virginiana. The T2 area, the depressed area is 0.6, and white hairs. Pitting on T1 is sort of, again, right down the middle of the line, 1 to 2 pits apart. So not on top of each other, but neither are we similar to some of these other where the pitting is quite distance. And, I have a comment, very generic. So let's see what we can see in this particular specimen. here from many years ago. And maybe we'll be done with Trachandrena. Okay. So we're here on the abdomen, and we can see here, we don't have the fullest, completest angle, but we might change that. The wings are pretty much covering in the other direction. But you can see that it's, I would say that's more like 0.7% or 70% rather than 60%, but it's certainly not 50%, and it's certainly not up here at the top in terms of the depressed area. And this area here, we're going to have to move this to see if we can see our 1 to 2 pit diameter apart sort of things. And on T1, oh, I'm going to bend that a little bit again. One good thing about this class, I've gotten better at moving things under the microscope online. Okay, so it's supposed to be 1 to 2 pit diameters. Yeah, that you could call it that.
Yeah.
Look in here. Yeah.
While you are right there.
Uh-huh.
On the sheet, like on the other notes on the species pages.
Yeah.
The gosh, I just lost it.
Clara's lost it. Okay, well, we'll get back to it.
Sorry, I'll come back to it if I find it.
Okay. All right. And totally with the wrong microscope. Let's see. Did we have another feature? Well, we had a fat to thin ratio that was, again, moderate to in between. See what we can see here. And yeah, you can see that. So here is the upper part, here is the lower part. The lower part would appear certainly wider than many of the others, and the upper part isn't extreme. So yeah, I think it's listed as 2, something like that. Let's go back. So again, this sort of middling of the road sort of thing. Oh, we're gonna look at the predominately triangle. And there we go. 2 fat to thin, 2 to 3. Sure. Now let's go to the predominately triangle. We're gonna yeah.
While you're still up there, the thing I found, vertex with 2 rows of pits.
2 rows of pits. Okay. That I don't even remember that. Does it say 2 rows of pits and the others have more or less?
The females of Virginiana differ from those of Miranda by the more sparsely punctate vertex in 2 horizontal rows.
Hmm.
And mesosputum, and I think I'm missing a word in my notes, and the usually shorter apical area of turga C4 that you showed.
Okay. All right. Here we have, oh my gosh, I would say there's 3 rows there. All right, it's a little bit difficult. This is definitely 1, 2, and maybe 3 of baby ones.
They're trying to.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know on that one. We're going to look at the predominately triangle now. Okay, so theoretically, it's going to be very difficult to differentiate the triangle area from the non-triangle area, and there's no real raised line per se on that boundary. On the inside, a little bit coarser, but not a whole lot. And so you can almost always draw this line from this corner down is going to be the triangle. And we could see that there is some sculpturing differences here. These are rectangular, these are not, but it's not sharp and it's not a whole lot. Obviously difference in terms of degree of sculpturalysis. So, are there any questions? Anything in the chat?
There's nothing in the chat. Please pop in.
So now that was the last of the Eastern ones as currently defined. And people can identify, hopefully, a lot more of their specimens. In all these cases, we almost always end up with a Andrena species, Andrena Trachandrena species, Andrena melandrena species, where we may be able to define a subgenus, or maybe not even that, but we're not sure about the species. And several new species have been discovered and are being actually written up in the East, in Andrena land. So don't be shy about calling things species.
I will say that David, our friend David, who has made so many resources and keep advertising, including the amazing guide to the Andrena guide, he is now on the eastern area of the country. And so that Andrena guide to the guide was made with a lot of Western specimens. So hook up with David to get some Eastern specimens, highly well done photographs. We love it.
Maybe he'll start identifying specimens for people.
I will leave him to speak to that. He is in the chat.
There you go.
I think that'd be a great idea.
Yeah, I do too.
Love it. And also, yeah, so I copy and pasted a lot of the little short descriptions from the species pages in the chat, but this seems like a group that we have really lush information on the pages, so don't sleep on those. That was all I got.
All right. I just have a quick question for everyone if they can get their chat ready. Just throw it into the chat. I'm curious about how often or how many times, something rough, that you guys have gone to the online saved talks that we have given here to either, oh, I need to go back and look at something or figure something out, or just because you missed one. If you could just throw that into the chat, including that I never do that, that would be great, because it gives us some idea about how much that resource is being used as a archive, and whether, yeah, just like, is it used at all? I mean, the fact that people show up means that they find somehow it useful or entertaining. I doubt that, to show up for these sessions, but I'm wondering about the archived work and whether that's convenient, easy to find, that kind of thing.
So far, we've got a lot of positives.
Mm-hmm. So people are.
I got 5 out of 6 are saying they love them.
Okay.
I'll also just add to that is I do most, especially students that start each year. I know that they go back, which is all a great request for you all. I have done a poor job of keeping track of what species we cover each time because other management while facilitating. So if you guys want to help make a table of contents because you go back through videos and you are noting what species, talk to me. That would be great. I've wanted to do that for a while and they have not, because capacity.
True. Yeah, then you could look up the table of contents, like, oh, have they talked at all about Andrena rehni? And then you can find out which show it's in, or maybe it's in more than one.
So people are doing that. Send them to me. A spreadsheet. Love it. Thank you. We will make it happen.
Okay. Or just an email, and then because they may only look at one, and then they can send it to Claire and she can add it to some master list. Okay. I mean, it's sort of a, a, a market with built-in usability, right? Because you wouldn't be here if the idea wasn't useful. So the expectations are that you probably would look at the videos. I think it's more what are the random people who aren't showing up for the live ones, are they using these videos or not?
Of species. And I'll just say, there's AI that could really help us with the transcripts, both training it to use these words, which again, David has a glossary that would be a great thing to train it from, in addition to all of the other glossaries available. If you want to chat on the side, I have some prompts to give ChatGPT, but I think that there's probably better AI out there that has less environmental impact. And we could get this done with a clever IT friend, including timestamps.
It sounds like the notes are also useful. I saw at least one person saying that they use the notes.
Yes. Cheat sheets are great.
All right, good. Yeah, good to see that. I mean, if no one was showing up, that that would be our marker, because you do have to spend some time to just come to the class, and so
We have a full classroom every time,
yeah.
and like around 20 people consistently. You nerds.
Hmm.
Right, next week.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the feedback.